At 78, Elton John is no longer just the rocket man who once seemed untouchable. For decades, he filled stadiums with fire and light, dazzling fans with his voice, his piano, and the outrageous costumes that turned every concert into a spectacle. He was the man who could take pain and transform it into music that healed millions. But today, the story looks very different. Behind the glittering glasses and the sequined jackets lies a man facing battles that no spotlight can disguise. Over the past few years, Elton has endured health scares that shocked the world. From life-threatening infections that sent him into intensive care, to surgeries that left him performing while hiding unbearable pain, to the cruel blow of losing vision in one eye, the Rocket Man has been forced to slow down in ways that once seemed impossible. For a man who lived to perform, the hardest truth isn't leaving the stage. It's the fear of missing out on the simplest moments of all, watching his sons grow, sharing laughter with his husband David, and seeing clearly the life he fought so hard to build. And while fans celebrate his legacy, rumors swirl about what's really next. Will Elton ever return to the stage, even for one last night? Or is this truly the final chapter of one of music's greatest lives? To understand the heartbreaking tragedy of Elton John at 78, we have to go back to the lonely child named Reginald Dwight, who turned silence into song and pain into anthems that still echo across the world. Elton John's story didn't begin with sequins or stadium lights. It began in a small post-war home in Pinner, Middlesex, where a boy named Reginald Dwight grew up in a house that rarely echoed with warmth. His father, Stanley, was a strict Royal Air Force officer who believed discipline mattered more than affection. His mother, Sheila, could be sharp with her words, leaving young Reg with little comfort in either parent. He would later admit that his father never once hugged him, never told him he was proud, and never even came to see him play. So when the house felt cold, Reg found refuge in an upright piano in the front room. The keys became his escape, a place where mistakes weren't punished and emotions could finally breathe. By the time he was 11, his gift had earned him a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music. Teachers were stunned by his ear for melody, but Reg didn't feel like he belonged in the world of classical symphonies. His heart beat to the sound of rhythm and blues pouring from the radio. By 15, he was playing in pubs for a few pounds, ignored by drinkers who had no idea they were listening to a future legend. The smoke, the noise, the indifference, it all hardened his resolve. He wasn't chasing fame, he just wanted to be seen. That moment finally came in 1967, when he answered a small ad and met a young lyricist named Bernie Taupin. Together they built one of music's greatest partnerships. With Bernie's words and Reg's melodies, something magical happened. Reginald Dwight disappeared, and Elton John was born. And with that name came a rebirth, but also a burden, because as the world finally began to notice him, the spotlight that once felt like salvation would soon become a storm he could barely survive. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit subscribe. More untold stories of music legends are coming soon. The 1970s turned Elton John into a force no one could ignore. With hits like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and Benny and the Jets, he was unstoppable. 7 straight albums hit #1 in America, and his concerts weren't just shows, they were explosions of color and sound. Dressed in rhinestone suits, feather bows and outrageous glasses, Elton didn't just play music. He created cathedrals of spectacle where fans felt transformed. But behind the glitter, the cracks were already showing. Fame demanded more than any one person could give. Elton later admitted that while the applause was deafening, the silence afterward felt even louder. He began reaching for ways to escape the pressure, late nights, wild parties, and dangerous habits that seemed to numb the loneliness but left him spiraling deeper. What looked like confidence on stage often hid the emptiness he felt off it. By the mid-70s, things had turned frightening. At his peak, Elton confessed he doubted he'd live past 30. For 16 years, he battled destructive cycles that nearly ended everything. Even as he packed arenas and dazzled millions, his health collapsed behind closed doors. Friends worried, doctors warned, but the grip of addiction was merciless. He could play to a roaring stadium, then retreat alone to face private torment no one could see. And yet, in the darkest years, light appeared where he least expected it. In 1989, Elton met Ryan White, a teenager fighting HIV who faced prejudice with remarkable dignity. Ryan's courage stunned Elton. Where Elton sought escape, Ryan stood firm. Where Elton faltered, Ryan fought with grace. Ryan's death at just 18 left Elton devastated, but also gave him the strength to finally confront his own demons. In 1990, Elton checked into rehab, admitting he wasn't entering as a superstar, but as a man desperate to survive. For the first time in years, he began to rebuild himself, not with applause but with discipline, and that decision would save his life. But survival was only the first step. Soon, even greater heartbreak would force him to turn pain into purpose. Sobriety gave Elton John back his life, but the years that followed brought losses that cut even deeper. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the AIDS crisis devastated the music world, and Elton found himself at the bedsides of friends who were fading far too soon. He often said those visits broke him, walking into quiet hospital rooms, holding hands with people abandoned by their families, and leaving in tears. For someone who had known isolation since childhood, the silence of those wards was unbearable. Among the friends he lost, two changed him forever. First was Ryan White, the boy whose courage pushed Elton to seek help, and then came Freddie Mercury. Freddie was more than just the frontman of Queen. To Elton, he was a brother in spirit, another showman who turned vulnerability into spectacle. In Freddie's final days, Elton visited him often, sitting quietly by his side. He later admitted that watching Freddie's body fail, while his spirit stayed strong, was one of the most painful experiences of his life. When Freddie died in 1991, Elton felt hollowed out, as though the stage itself had lost part of its soul. Then came 1997, and the sudden loss of Princess Diana. She wasn't just a global icon to Elton, she was a close friend who saw past the feathers and rhinestones to the fragile man beneath. When Diana was killed in that tragic car accident, Elton was asked to sing at her funeral. His performance of Candle in the Wind, rewritten for her, became one of the most watched and most heartbreaking moments in history. The single went on to sell more than 33 million copies, the best-selling in history, but Elton never saw it as triumph, only as a final gift to a friend he loved. Out of all this grief came a new mission. In 1992, Elton founded the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which has since raised hundreds of millions to fight the disease and support those affected. For him, it wasn't philanthropy, it was redemption, a way to turn private heartbreak into hope for others. But even as his heart found purpose, his body would soon face battles that fame and money couldn't shield him from. For much of his career, Elton John seemed indestructible. He survived addiction, heartbreak, and the crushing weight of fame. But starting in 2009, his own body began to betray him in ways that no amount of determination could disguise. It started with a violent E. coli infection that left him shaking with fever and confined to a hospital bed. The man who once commanded stadiums now lay helpless, humbled by the reality of his own fragility. Just a few years later, pneumonia struck, robbing him of breath and leaving him wondering if he would live to see the morning. Then, in 2013, his appendix ruptured and filled his body with abscesses so severe that doctors warned he might not have survived had he waited any longer for surgery. But the darkest moment came in 2017, during a tour in South America. What began as stomach pains escalated into a rare bacterial infection that spread rapidly through his body. By the time he was flown back to London, Elton was rushed straight from the airport into intensive care. For 2 nights, he hovered on the edge of life, surrounded by machines that kept him alive. When he finally opened his eyes, it was nothing short of a private miracle. As if that weren't enough, later the same year, doctors discovered prostate cancer. Surgery removed the tumor, but complications left him weak and humiliated. Elton admitted that on some nights he performed before sold-out arenas while secretly wearing diapers beneath his sequined outfits, hiding just how much pain he was in. The trials kept coming. In 2021, a hip injury forced him to undergo surgery. In 2023, he suffered a fall at his home in France. And then in 2024 came the cruelest blow, an infection that cost him the vision in one eye. For a man who built his life on spectacle, on light, color, and performance, the thought of not being able to clearly see his sons was the most heartbreaking of all. Through it all, Elton lived daily with the slow discipline of type 2 diabetes, careful diets, blood checks, and endless routines. The rocket man who once soared now lived by strict rules to keep his body going. But even as illness piled up, Elton refused to surrender. By the late 2010s, Elton John knew that his time on the road was running out. In 2018, he announced the Farewell Yellow Brick Road Tour, a massive global journey that that would stretch across 5 years and more than 300 shows. It wasn't just a tour, it was a celebration, a final chance for fans across the world to see him at the piano one more time. Each performance carried a bittersweet energy, the joy of watching a legend in action mixed with the sadness of knowing it was the last farewell. But behind the curtain, the strain was obvious. Health scares forced him to cancel shows. On stage, he sometimes leaned heavily on his piano, fighting through pain the audience couldn't see. When the final notes rang out in 2023, Elton told the world he was stepping away from touring to spend more time with his family. For Elton, that family is everything. His husband David Furnish has been by his side since 1993, offering the stability and unconditional love Elton had craved since childhood. Together they are raising 2 sons, Zachary and Elijah, who became the greatest joy of Elton's later years. He often says that being a father gave his life a meaning that no amount of fame ever could. At home in Windsor, life looks very different from the chaos of the road. Instead of sequined outfits and roaring crowds, Elton spends mornings cooking breakfast for his boys, afternoons helping with homework, and evenings writing letters with David, a Saturday tradition they plan to leave behind for their children to read one day. For fans, it may be hard to picture Elton John outside the spotlight, but for Elton, these are the moments that matter most. After decades of applause, he finally found peace and laughter at the dinner table and bedtime stories with his sons. And yet, even as he embraces this quieter life, rumors continue to swirl. Is this really the end of Elton John's time on stage? Even after the farewell tour ended, the world refused to believe that Elton John was truly done with the stage. Every photo of him at an event, every rare public appearance, sparks a wave of speculation. Is the Rocket Man really finished, or is he just waiting for the right moment to come back for one last surprise? Some rumors suggest he's been quietly writing music again with Bernie Taupin, his lifelong partner in song. Whispers of unreleased tracks and secret recording sessions surface now and then, feeding hope that another album could be on the horizon. Others insist that Elton may return for special appearances, maybe a one-off concert, maybe a collaboration with a younger star. After all, Elton has made a career of reinvention, and shocking the world has always been part of his magic. But the speculation isn't just about his music. Tabloids often publish alarming headlines about his health, pointing to photos where he looks frail or tired. Some claim his eyesight problems are only the beginning of something worse, while others insist he's hiding more than he admits. None of these stories have ever been confirmed, but they spread quickly, and fans find themselves torn between worry and hope. Elton, for his part, keeps people guessing. He's made it clear that family comes first, but he's also never ruled out small projects, and maybe that's how he wants it, to leave the world wondering, always keeping a touch of mystery. Whether he ever returns to the stage or not, one thing is certain: Elton John's name will never fade. The question isn't if he still matters, it's how he chooses to write the final lines of his story. When you look at Elton John's life as a whole, it's impossible not to be struck by the scale of what he's achieved. More than 300 million records sold, countless awards, Grammys, an Oscar, a Tony, even an Emmy that made him one of the rare artists to claim EGOT status. In 1998, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, a title that would have stunned the lonely boy from Pinner who once longed for his father's approval. But numbers and honors only tell part of the story. Elton's real legacy is in the way his music connected with people. Songs like Your Song, Tiny Dancer, Rocket Man, and Candle in the Wind didn't just top charts, they became emotional touchstones. Weddings, funerals, quiet nights at home, and moments of heartbreak have all carried his voice as a soundtrack. He gave words and melodies to feelings people couldn't always explain. His legacy also lives in his resilience. Elton's honesty about his addictions, his struggles, and his recovery has inspired millions. He proved that even those who seem larger than life are still human, and that survival is itself a victory worth celebrating. His story is a reminder that it's never too late to start over, no matter how far you've fallen. And then there's his activism. Through the Elton John AIDS Foundation, he has raised more than $600 million to fund treatment, prevention, and awareness around the world. For many, his philanthropy will be remembered just as much as his music. At 78, Elton John is both fragile and eternal. His body has slowed, his eyesight has dimmed, but the mark he's left is unshakable. He isn't just an entertainer, he is a survivor, a philanthropist, a father, and a symbol of endurance. Legends may age, but their light never disappears. The tragedy of Elton John at 78 isn't that his music has faded or that his legacy is in doubt. It's that a man who gave so much joy to the world now faces battles that strip away the simplest pleasures, the ability to watch his children grow without fear, to step on a stage with confidence, to live free from constant speculation. For fans who saw him as unstoppable, watching him vulnerable feels almost unbearable, and yet there's inspiration in that vulnerability. Elton has never pretended to be invincible. He's admitted his struggles with honesty, showing that courage isn't about never falling, it's about rising again and again. From the lonely boy at a piano, to the rocket man lighting up stadiums, to the father who treasures bedtime stories more than applause, his journey proves that greatness takes many forms. His health may falter, his eyesight may dim, the stage may never see him as often again, but his music still echoes in every corner of the world. His activism continues to save lives, and his spirit inspires millions to keep standing, no matter how many times they've fallen. Elton John's story is heartbreaking, but it's also deeply human, and for that reason, his flame will never go out. If this story touched you, make sure you're subscribed. There are more untold journeys of legends like Elton John that you won't want to miss.